Mohe, Heilongjiang Province, China. The thermometer plunges to minus 53 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, the world doesn't just feel cold, it transforms. Diesel thickens into jelly, rubber turns brittle and shatters. Exposed skin can die in minutes. In this corner of northern China, winter is not a season, it is a predator. Now imagine something far more familiar. The power grid fails. In your modern code-compliant home, the furnace falls silent. Within hours, the warmth drains away. Fiberglass insulation, drywall, hollow doors. They were built to trap air, not store heat. And air is a poor battery. The moment it escapes through cracks and seams, your comfort vanishes with it. Within a day, pipes begin to burst. Within 2, the house drops below freezing. You gather in one room, wrapped in every coat you own, slowly realizing that your shelter depends entirely on a fragile system outside its walls. But rewind the clock 800 years. Same region, same brutal winters, perhaps even colder during the depths of the Little Ice Age. Inside a modest home of earth and brick, a family sits in calm warmth. There is no electricity, no gas line, no thermostat. Yet the surface beneath them radiates steady heat long after the fire has gone out. How? How did a civilization without modern technology withstand winters that could cripple our infrastructure today? This is not just history, it is a forgotten philosophy of engineering. At some point, we traded resilience for convenience. We built houses that heat empty space instead of human bodies. And in doing so, we ignored one of the simplest truths of thermodynamics. Do not heat the air, heat the human. Welcome to Historia Prime. Today we uncover the thermal genius of ancient China, the Kang, the Horde, and the Yao Dong, systems that turned earth, brick, and stone into silent batteries of warmth. And by the end of this journey, you may look at your thermostat differently and rethink what true survival really means. Part 1. The enemy at the gate. Before we admire the solution, we must first respect the problem. We speak casually about cold today, a chilly morning, a winter storm, a bad forecast. But the cold of northern China, the Mongolian steppe, and the Loess Plateau is not an inconvenience. It is an adversary. This is a climate where the ground freezes solid for meters deep. A land dominated by the Siberian high, a massive dome of dense, dry, Arctic air that gathers over northeastern Eurasia like a coiled fist. When those winds descend from Siberia, they do not simply lower the temperature. They strip heat away from anything alive. Metal contracts, wood cracks, breath crystallizes mid-air, and the human body, designed for narrow thermal balance, begins to fail. Historically, this was not poetic winter scenery. It was existential pressure. During the Little Ice Age, from the 14th to the 19th centuries, temperatures dropped across the northern hemisphere. In Europe, the Thames froze over. In China, during the Wei-Jin cold periods, harvests failed, rivers locked in ice, and entire communities stood on the edge of collapse. This was not a time for comfort. It was a time for survival engineering. When fuel is scarce and winter lasts for months, efficiency is no longer about saving money. It is about saving lives. And here is where the story becomes fascinating. Ancient Chinese builders were not merely craftsmen. They were students of physics, even if they did not call it that. They understood something that modern architecture often forgets. Heat moves in predictable ways. It moves through convection, the heating of air. It moves through conduction, direct contact between materials. And it moves through radiation, the invisible transfer of energy from a warm surface to a cooler body. Modern homes are obsessed with convection. We heat the air, then push it around with fans and ducts. But air is a terrible battery. It stores almost no energy. Open a door for 10 seconds at minus 50 degrees, and that precious warmth disappears instantly, replaced by a mass of heavier, colder air. We build boxes designed to trap air, not store heat. The ancients looked at the same physics and reached a different conclusion. If air cannot hold warmth for long, then do not depend on air. If you want resilience, you need mass. You need density. You need something that absorbs heat slowly and releases it even more slowly. You need a battery, not an electrical battery, but a thermal one. And the greatest battery available to them was not imported steel or advanced polymers. It was the earth itself. Clay, brick, stone, soil, the ground beneath their feet. They realized that survival in extreme cold is not about fighting the air temperature outside. It is about building a system that stores energy in solid matter, a system that cannot vanish the moment the wind changes direction. That insight, simple, almost obvious, would become the foundation of one of the most elegant heating philosophies in human history. And it begins with a platform of brick, quietly radiating warmth in the dead of winter. Part 2. Kang, a machine for living. Step inside a traditional northern Chinese home in winter, and you won't see a roaring fireplace dominating the wall. Instead, you'll notice a raised platform stretching along the southern side of the room, built from brick and clay. It looks like a bed. This is the Kang. But calling it a heated bed barely scratches the surface. The Kang was a compact, brilliantly engineered heat system, and the true center of household life. In modern homes, we divide our activities into separate rooms. We cook in one space, sleep in another, relax somewhere else, and then we try to heat them all. The ancients saw that as wasteful. In the harsh winters of northern China, the Kang combined living room, dining room, and bedroom into one warm zone. Here's how it worked. Inside the solid brick platform ran a network of flue channels connected to the kitchen stove. When the family cooked their meals, burning wood, stalks, or dried dung, the hot smoke didn't go straight up a chimney. Instead, it was redirected into the hollow channels beneath the Kang. As the smoke traveled through the maze, it slowed down. It transferred its heat into the dense brick and earth. By the time it exited outdoors, most of its energy had already been absorbed. In a typical open fireplace, much of the heat escapes into the sky. In the Kang system, waste heat became stored energy. This is the power of thermal lag. Brick and earth heat slowly, but once warm, they release that heat gradually for hours. A single morning fire could charge the Kang like a battery, radiating warmth for 12 to 15 hours. The air in the room might remain cool, perhaps only 10 degrees Celsius. But if you sat or slept on the Kang, you felt steady, conductive warmth beneath you. Comfort no longer depended on heating thousands of cubic feet of air. It depended on heating the human body directly. That simple shift changed everything. And beyond physics, the Kang reshaped family life. It became the warmest place in the house, where children played, elders sewed, guests gathered. Fuel was precious, and the Kang ensured that every scrap of it served both survival and community. In a world of minus 50 degrees, the Kang was not just furniture. It was resilience built from brick. Part 3. The Imperial Fire Floor, the Dragon's Warmth. Now let us leave the peasant's cottage and step into the heart of imperial power, the Forbidden City in Beijing, because even emperors freeze. While common families relied on the Kang, the imperial court demanded something more expansive. They did not want warmth confined to a bed. They wanted the entire room, the entire palace, to breathe heat. The system they used was called huodi, which translates simply as fire ground. In essence, it was a ground-level Kang, a radiant heating floor centuries ahead of its time. If you walk through the great halls of the Forbidden City today, you may notice something curious. There are no towering fireplaces, no massive hearths lining the walls. And yet the emperor sat on his throne through Beijing winters without shivering. The answer lies beneath the floor. Archaeological studies reveal that the palace floors were elevated on brick pillars, creating a hollow chamber underneath. Outside the main halls and sleeping quarters, there was a furnace pit, similar in principle to the Roman hypercaust, yet refined with a uniquely Chinese priority: safety and cleanliness. The furnace was placed outside the main chamber. This was not an accident. It ensured that smoke, soot, and carbon monoxide never entered the emperor's lungs. When charcoal was ignited, hot air flowed into the cavity beneath the floor, circulating gently before exiting through a chimney system. Just like the Kang, the heat did not rush upward and disappear. It was absorbed into the massive paving stones above. And here is where the experience becomes almost cinematic. Outside, the winter wind howls across Beijing. Frost grips the rooftops, but inside, you can walk barefoot across stone. The warmth rises slowly, evenly. There is no roar of a furnace, no blast of forced air, no drafts along the walls. Only a quiet, invisible heat radiating upward from beneath your feet. This is radiant energy in its purest form. It warms the body directly. It eliminates cold surfaces. It turns the entire floor into a battery. And the imperial architects went even further. During the Han Dynasty, historical records describe so-called pepper rooms for the empresses. The walls were plastered with a mixture of clay and crushed Sichuan pepper flowers. Symbolically, this represented fertility and warmth. But practically, the thick organic plaster functioned as insulation and a humidity buffer. It softened the harshness of stone walls and enhanced the sensation of enveloping heat. In other words, this was not just about fire. It was about system design, about layering materials, about controlling airflow, about storing energy in mass rather than chasing it with flames. And perhaps most remarkable of all was the resilience. If charcoal deliveries were delayed, if storms disrupted supply, the enormous stone floors retained heat for days, not hours. The palace did not instantly collapse into freezing silence. It coasted, it endured. What we often call luxury today, heated marble floors, was once born from necessity. And behind that luxury was a principle modern buildings are only now rediscovering. If you build with mass, you gain time. Time to react, time to survive, time to stay warm when systems fail. In the Imperial Huodi, we see not extravagance, but wisdom elevated to stone. Part 4. The Earth as a Shield. The Yao Dong. We have seen heated beds. We have seen heated floors. But what if the house itself was the heater? Travel west to the Lurs Plateau, provinces like Shanxi and Shanxi, where the land rolls in waves of yellow earth, compacted and deep, stretching hundreds of meters below the surface. This soil is not loose sand. It is dense, stable, and strong enough to carve. And instead of building upward into the freezing wind, the people here built inward. These homes are called Yao Dong, cave dwellings carved directly into the earth. Even today, more than 30 million people still live in them. And no, it is not simply poverty that keeps them there. It is physics. Modern construction often forgets a simple truth. The earth is a constant. Dig down just 3 meters and the temperature stabilizes. It no longer swings wildly with the seasons. Whether the surface air is minus 30 degrees in winter or scorching in summer, the soil remains steady, usually between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius year-round. Now think about survival math. If you live in a lightweight wooden structure and the outside temperature drops to minus 30, your heating system must fight a 50-degree difference just to reach a livable 20 degrees inside. That is not comfort. That is combat. But inside a Yaodong, carved into a hillside, you begin at 10 degrees before you even light a fire. You are not fighting winter anymore. You are working with the planet. The walls are not 6 inches of fiberglass. They are meters of solid earth, an enormous thermal mass that absorbs and releases heat slowly. Add a modest Kang inside the cave, and the heat spreads into the surrounding soil, where it is stored and gently radiated back. These homes remain cool during summer heat waves and warm during brutal winters. They are quiet, stable, protected from wind, and in terms of energy efficiency, they outperform many modern high-rises made of steel and glass. Some Yaodong take this even further with a sunken courtyard design. Instead of carving into a hillside, builders dig a large square pit into flat ground, then carve rooms into the 4 walls of that pit. The courtyard sits below the surface, shielded from sweeping winds. Cold air passes overhead, while sunlight and still air collect below. Without computers, without modern engineering software, they created passive solar systems thousands of years before we named the concept. The lesson here is not that we must all move into caves. It is that the Earth itself can be an ally. When you build with mass instead of against it, when you shelter from wind rather than challenge it, when you begin with a stable baseline temperature instead of fighting extremes, survival becomes easier. The Yaodong teaches a radical idea in a world obsessed with control. Sometimes the smartest move is not to resist nature. It is to lean into it. Part 5. The 9 Nines and the Strategy of Survival. Architecture was the hardware of survival, but hardware alone is never enough. The ancient Chinese did not rely only on brick, earth, and stone. They also built something far less visible, a cultural operating system designed for winter. Because surviving -50 degrees is not just about walls, it is about timing, behavior, discipline. And that system was called the 9 Nines. The 9 Nines was an ancient meteorological calendar used across northern China and Mongolia. Instead of seeing winter as one endless stretch of cold, they divided it into a narrative. 9 periods of 9 days each, beginning at the winter solstice. 81 days. Structured, observed, understood. There was even a folk rhyme to guide people through it. In the first and second nines, keep your hands in your pockets. The cold is arriving. In the third and fourth nines, dogs and cats freeze to death. This is the peak danger, the brutal heart of winter, when temperatures plunge into the -40 and -50 range. In the fifth and sixth nines, look at the willows across the river. The first signs of spring begin to whisper. This was not poetry for entertainment, it was a survival schedule. Families knew precisely when to reinforce windows with extra layers of paper or felt. They knew when to seal cracks, when to reduce travel, when to conserve fuel. Winter was predictable because it was studied, and predictability reduces fear. They adapted their clothing accordingly. We often think of insulated puffer jackets as a modern innovation, yet northern Chinese communities wore thick cotton-padded coats and trousers called mianao, which worked on the exact same principle, trapping layers of still air close to the body. Further north, in Mongolia, the deal dominated, a long robe lined with sheepskin, worn with the fur against the skin. The soft interior trapped warm air directly against the body, while the outer leather layer blocked the cutting wind. It was simple, layered insulation long before synthetic fabrics. And then there was food. They did not survive winter on light meals and raw vegetables. They drank buttery tea. They ate rich stews heavy in fat. They understood, without modern nutrition science, that the human body is a furnace. And in deep winter, you must feed the furnace slow-burning fuel. The lesson here is profound. A warm house without warm habits is not enough. The 9 Nines teaches us that resilience is seasonal awareness. It is preparation before crisis. It is adjusting clothing, diet, and daily behavior to match environmental reality. If the grid fails tomorrow, architecture will matter. But so will your routine, your stored food, your layered clothing. your decision to gather in one space instead of heating an entire structure. The ancients survived not because they were stronger. They survived because they synchronized their lives with winter's rhythm. And that rhythm, even today, is still predictable, if we choose to listen. Part 6. Where did we go wrong? So now we've seen the Kang, the Huodi, the Yao Dong, systems that were elegant, fail-safe, and brutally efficient. They required no electricity, no complex machinery, no delicate infrastructure, and yet they worked in temperatures that would cripple a modern suburb overnight. So the question becomes unavoidable. If they were so effective, why did we abandon them? Why do we now live in houses that can cost a fortune, yet freeze solid the moment the grid goes down? The answer is surprisingly simple: cheap energy. In the 20th century, we entered an age of abundance. Coal, oil, natural gas, and electricity became so accessible and inexpensive that efficiency stopped being a survival necessity. It became a budgeting concern, and eventually, even that concern faded. Instead of building thick walls, it was cheaper to build thin ones and simply burn more fuel. Instead of designing homes that stored heat, we built homes that constantly consumed it. We traded resilience for control. We wanted to control the air temperature of every square foot in a 3,000 square foot house. We wanted floor-to-ceiling glass windows for the view, even though glass is one of the worst insulators imaginable. We embedded steel beams and concrete slabs straight through our insulation layers, unknowingly creating what engineers call thermal bridges. A thermal bridge is exactly what it sounds like: a pathway for heat to escape. It is a shortcut for energy loss. And if you look at a modern house through a thermal camera on a winter night, it doesn't look solid. It glows like a Christmas tree. Every stud, every window frame, every balcony connection radiates warmth into the darkness. Heat doesn't disappear randomly, it follows structure. Ancient homes were monolithic. A wall of rammed earth or packed soil has no hidden steel spine carrying warmth outside. It is one continuous mass. No shortcuts, no escape routes. Modern homes, by contrast, are layered assemblies of materials: wood, foam, metal, drywall. Each junction another opportunity for energy to leak away. And here is the deeper issue. We built houses that function like life support machines. They require constant input. They assume the grid will always hum. They assume fuel will always flow. The ancient home assumed nothing. It was an organism. It worked with gravity, with mass, with airflow. It respected physics instead of overpowering it. This does not mean modern engineering is foolish, but it does mean we forgot something fundamental. When energy is cheap, you design for convenience. When energy is scarce, you design for survival. And the moment cheap energy becomes unstable, whether through blackouts, storms, or supply disruptions, the difference becomes painfully clear. The lesson is not that we must abandon modern homes. The lesson is that resilience must be built in, not plugged in. Because when the power fails, the house that survives is not the one with the biggest furnace. It is the one that understands heat. Part 7. The lesson for today. So what do we do with all of this? We can't all move into hillside caves. We can't tear up our apartments and install brick beds. Or, can we at least borrow the principles? Because here's the irony. The ideas that kept ancient Chinese homes warm at -50 degrees are quietly returning, repackaged as cutting-edge green innovation. Thermal mass is back. Modern passive house design, now considered the gold standard of eco-building, emphasizes dense materials that store solar heat during the day and release it slowly at night. Architects are once again exploring rammed earth, concrete cores, and masonry walls, not as relics, but as heat batteries. Radiant heating is luxury again. Hydronic floor systems, water circulating through tubing beneath the floor, are booming in popularity. It is essentially the Yaodong, reborn with PEX pipes and high-efficiency boilers. And homeowners are rediscovering something intuitive. Warm feet and a cool head feel better than blasting hot, dry air through vents. Then there's the most subtle shift of all, heating the human, not the space. Today we call them personal comfort systems. Heated office chairs, desk mats, foot warmers, low-energy blankets. It sounds futuristic, but it is simply the modern version of the hand stoves and foot stoves that Chinese nobles once carried inside their sleeves. The technology has changed, the physics has not. And here is the real takeaway. If you are concerned about the next blackout, or even just rising energy bills, you do not need to rebuild your home from scratch. You need to think like an ancient builder. First, create a microclimate. If the power goes out, do not attempt to heat an entire house. Choose the smallest room. Seal it. Layer insulation where you can. Blankets over windows, rugs on floors, even temporary barriers across doorways. Concentrate warmth where bodies actually exist. Second, create thermal mass. If you have a wood stove, surround it with bricks or stones. Let them absorb heat while the fire burns so they can release it slowly through the night. Even small masses, ceramic tiles, masonry, water containers, can extend warmth beyond the flame. Third, focus on conduction. Stop chasing the air temperature. Use hot water bottles. Use electric blankets if you have battery backup. Sit on warm surfaces. Sleep on insulated pads. Warm your body directly. That shift alone can reduce energy demand dramatically. Meanwhile, in rural China, engineers are experimenting with something called the hanging Kang. It lifts the traditional heated platform off the ground, allowing warmth to radiate from both top and bottom surfaces. Some designs even integrate phase-change materials, substances that melt and solidify to store large amounts of heat, combining ancient mud with modern chemistry. What we are witnessing is not nostalgia, it is rediscovery. The future of heating may not be louder furnaces or bigger power grids. It may be smarter mass, quieter radiation, and more intentional design. Because in the end, resilience is not about having more energy. It is about using less, more wisely. And perhaps the most powerful lesson ancient China offers us is this. When you align with physics instead of fighting it, winter stops being an enemy. It becomes something you are prepared for. Conclusion: the wisdom of the past. We often look back at history and quietly assume our ancestors were primitive. We imagine their lives as harsh, uncomfortable, lacking. No smartphones, no thermostats, no central heating humming through hidden ducts. And yet, when the blizzard comes, when the wind howls like a wolf at the door, when the lights flicker once, twice, and then vanish into darkness, who is truly primitive? The person standing inside a glass and drywall box, watching the indoor temperature fall hour by hour, or the family gathered on a platform of warm earth, sipping tea, wrapped in quiet confidence, protected not by electricity, but by mass. The ancient Chinese did not conquer the cold with brute force. They did not attempt to overpower winter with louder furnaces or endless fuel. They studied it. They observed how heat moves, how wind strips energy away, how earth holds temperature steady beneath the surface. And then they arranged clay, stone, smoke, and sunlight into systems that cooperated with those laws. They built homes that were not machines, dependent on a fragile grid. They built homes that were batteries, and in doing so, they teach us something uncomfortable and empowering. True technology is not always electronic. It is not always digital. It is not always new. True technology is the intelligent arrangement of materials in harmony with physics. It is knowing when to add mass instead of more fuel. It is understanding that warmth can radiate from beneath your feet instead of blasting from a vent above your head. It is remembering that resilience is built into structure, not plugged into walls. Perhaps the greatest lesson here is this. We do not need to return to caves or imperial palaces, but we may need to return to thinking like builders who respected nature rather than assuming control over it. Maybe it is time to relearn the simplest principle of all. Do not heat the air, heat the human. So now I want to ask you, could you survive a winter sleeping on a brick bed? Could you adapt your space, your habits, your materials if the power failed tomorrow? Or do you have your own methods for staying warm when the grid goes silent? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into the thermal engineering of ancient China, take a moment to hit the like button. It truly helps warm up the algorithm. And make sure you're subscribed to Historia Prime so you don't miss our next exploration into the forgotten wisdom that once kept civilizations alive. Stay warm, and I'll see you in the next one.